1 Samuel chapter 30, and we're going to do 30 and 31. Beginning in 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 21, because that's where we that's where we left off last Wednesday night. So 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 21. Verse 21. The Bible reads, "And David came to the 200 men, which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide at the brook Bezor. And they went forth to meet David and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. Then answered all the wicked men and men of Belial, of those that went with David, and said, Because they went not with us, we will not give them aught of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. Then said David, Ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord hath given us, who hath preserved us, and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. For who will hearken unto you in this matter? But as his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. They shall part alike. And it was so from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day." So to recap where we're at, of course, David had gone with the Philistines to fight against Israel. The Philistines do not trust David, so they sent him home. So he went home and found that his city that he was currently living in, Ziklag, had been burned, and all the stuff, all the people, everyone had been taken by the Amalekites. So David and his 600 men pursued the Amalekites. 200 of those men were unable to keep up. They weren't able to continue. So David left them guarding the camp. And he and 400 men went and basically destroyed the Amalekites and recovered every single person. Now, David and his 400 men come back to where the 200 men were. And, really tonight's Bible study, I want to contrast the attitude and the outlook of a Christian versus the attitude and the outlook of a non-believer. Okay? And, we can especially see this kind of thing today. Christians in general, and they definitely, most definitely should, have sympathy and understanding for those who are weaker than we are, for those who have more struggles than we do. Whether they're weaker spiritually or weaker physically or something like that. Most Christians seem to have more pity on them. Whereas the sons of Belial, which among the 400 men that David took with him to defeat the Amalekites, there were people there that were not saved, that were not children of God. They were sons of Belial, which means they were children of the devil. But they were with David. They come back and they say, because these guys didn't help us at all, they shouldn't get anything at all. The reason they didn't help them is not because they, were chicken or anything. They were just wore out. So David thinks, that this is a valid reason for them not to go. They're too tired to go. They're faint by the way. So David tells the sons of Belial and the wicked men, no, they will take an equal part because they are part of us. And so, we need to have that attitude, of course. There are no, Paul writes about this in the New Testament. There are no unimportant body parts when it comes to the body of Christ. everyone is important. You know, you got to have the fingers, the toes, the mouth, the eyes, all of the parts. Everybody can't be one thing. Everyone has different skills. Everyone has different endurance levels. We're all different. That's what makes the body of Christ strong. But out in the world, we see a difference. We see selfishness. We see self-centered. You know, we have these people here who, in this story, say, look, because you didn't participate in the battle, you shouldn't have anything. And they don't really have any pity for the ones that weren't able to go because they were just too tired to go. They were physically unable to go. So we see that today. You know, it's no coincidence, by the way, in the current debate that is raging in the United States of America, that it is primarily Christians who are against abortion, who are for taking up for the weakest among us, which would be the unborn children. You know, we are the ones that do not believe in abortion, don't want abortion. It is no coincidence then also that the most wicked and vile people in this world, the sons of Belial, want abortion for selfish interests. They don't care about the unborn baby. They just care about themselves. That's really what it boils down to. And so we can see that. So we as Christians, we have a reputation and we should have the attitude of, let me see how I can help someone else who's struggling, especially from a spiritual perspective and from a Christian perspective. You know, we don't want to leave any of our brothers and sisters behind. The wicked and the sons of Belial of this world do not care about the weak. They do not. You know, they're the ones that are always for, it seems like, you know, not only when it comes to abortion, but they're also the ones that say, hey, once you get old and too infirm to do anything, you know, you should just kill yourself. Right? I mean, they're the ones that, like, you know, this, who was the doctor? He died a long time ago. Jack Kevorkian, right? The assisted suicide, all that stuff. That attitude comes from people that do not believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. The attitude of life is cheap comes from the devil, not from God. And so, you know, all these people that are protesting for abortion, if they're Christians, you know, they have a lot to answer for. Because basically they're putting self-interest in front of others. And I see this in a lot of people today, especially in young people. And it's not really the fault necessarily of the young people as much as it is the parents who raised them. Because if you're, I mean, people in, let's say, you know, my children's generation, they've had everything handed to them. You know, I mean, even take a look at, you know, my kids, none of them had to work when they were younger. I made enough money for us to live on. So they could do their own thing. Play sports, whatever, that kind of stuff. But my father's generation and the generation before him, a lot of those children had to go to work at a very young age to help out. And they didn't get everything that we get. You know, it would amaze children today. I mean, what would children today say if they woke up on Christmas morning and they looked under the tree and they had an orange and a pair of shoes? That's what my grandfather got when he was younger. And happy to get that orange because that's a real treat. You know, so, but, you know, the younger generation, everything was handed to them. And so now they're a very selfish generation. They have trouble. I have noticed this among them. They don't do this necessarily on purpose, but they have trouble looking at a situation from the other person's perspective and understanding how that person feels and then acting accordingly. It's all just a one-track mind. It's all about me. It's all about how I feel. And that's what I see out there in the world a lot. That's an attitude of the sons of Belial and the wicked here in this section. So continuing on in verse 26. So David basically made a rule that said anybody who's in the army, whether they're guarding in the camp or doing whatever, when it comes time to divide up the spoil, everybody gets an equal amount. And that's a law that was set and held throughout all, the time of Israel. So verse 27, to them which were in Bethel, and to them which were in South Ramoth, and to them which were in, verse 26. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah, even to his friends, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. David he's a good politician. So, the nation of Israel is currently getting ready to fight a battle with the Philistines that they're going to lose big. David wins big, and he sends some stuff to the south of Judah. He says, here you go. Here's a present from your buddy David, some food, some money, some clothes, whatever. And interestingly enough then, when it comes time for David to be king, it is these people that he is nice to that recognize him as king first. Takes some of the tribes a little bit longer. And that's what sometimes we don't understand with just an overview of the Bible. Hey, Saul was king, then David was king. First off, as we study this, we'll see that's not necessarily the case. Saul was king. Then David, who was anointed by Samuel, becomes king of the southern part. And Ishbosheth, I believe is his name, who is Saul's only remaining son, who has a son named Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth, most people know. But Ishbosheth was Saul's youngest son, who then becomes king of the northern part, backed by Abner. And it takes David 10 years to become king over a united Israel. It's not just, hey, Saul, then David. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there. So David sort of lays the groundwork here by giving some presents to the area where he grew up. Some stuff that he got from the war. So verse 27, to them which were in Bethel, and to them which were in South Ramon, and to them which were in Jadder, to them which were in Aurora, and to them which were in Siphmoth, and to them which were at Eshtemoa, and to them which were in Rachel, and to them which were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, and to them which were in the cities of the Kenites, and to them which were in Hormah, and to them which were in Choreshan, and to them which were in Athak, and to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to haunt. So places basically where David had hid out as a result of hiding from Saul, he gave them presents. And then when Saul dies, they're going to want to make David king. So generosity is, oftentimes it will benefit you. And it does benefit David here. So chapter 31, let's take a look at it here. Chapter 31 finishes up the life of Saul. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines, and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, Saul's sons. 3 of Saul's sons die in the battle. Of course, Saul, we remember, is a big, tough guy. And he's pretty old at this point, because he's been king for about 30 years. And the battle went sore against Saul, And the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor bearer, Draw thy sword, and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through, and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. So, Saul's in the battle. Israel's getting beat very badly. Saul's 3 sons die. Saul is, I guess, what you call mortally wounded. He's got probably several arrows sticking out of him. And he says, I do not want to be captured by the Philistines. So he asked his armor bearer to kill him. This armor bearer is not going to kill the king. So Saul winds up killing himself. We see it right here. In other words, Saul commits suicide. A few things we know about the Bible. Salvation is the same in the Old Testament or the New Testament. Men calling upon the name of the Lord. We know that once you're saved, you're always saved. We know that Samuel told Saul, tomorrow you will be with me, and Samuel was in heaven. Saul's a Christian man who was in heaven. He committed suicide, but there is not a sin like that in the Bible that will keep you from going to heaven. This is an old Catholic doctrine that spread all throughout, especially this area. I know a lot of Baptists who do not understand that committing suicide does not condemn you to hell. That being said, I am not condoning committing suicide. I'm just telling you that it does not send you to hell. Because I've had people ask me, they've had family members who have committed suicide. And look, they don't commit suicide because they hate God. And they might be saved. They'll commit suicide because they were prescribed drugs that chemically affected their mind and caused them to get depressed. Or for some other reason. But just the act of committing suicide does not condemn you to hell. And especially Dad's generation, the older generation, I run into a lot of people who believe that. And I'm like, well, where do you get that from? It is not found in the Bible. Another very famous person that clearly believed in God that killed himself in the Bible was Samson, who also committed suicide because he pulled the pillars of that temple down upon himself. I believe we'll see both of these people in heaven, and others who may have committed suicide but were saved, we'll see in heaven. They have to be saved, of course, but just the act of suicide does not send you to hell. I've heard that a lot in my life, so I just wanted to point that out. It's not biblical. It's not something found in the Bible. That being said, committing suicide is a sin. We don't want to do it, but it's, I'm sure it hurts. Hope to never find out. So, as far as that goes, it is a sad thing. You have to be pretty desperate to commit suicide. Saul was in a pretty desperate situation here. Hey, I am already badly injured, and if the Philistines catch me, and they will, I'm going to hurt even more. So, in this case, he killed himself. Verse 5, and when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. Nothing else really to do. Philistines catch him, he's going to die. So both die. So Saul died, verse 6, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men that same day together. And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that were on the other side of Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So the Philistines have won big time. They've routed them. There were regular citizens that Saul would have to the army. They evacuated the cities, kind of like, Ukraine and Russia or something like that, Citizens are out of there. The occupied forces move in. Verse 8, and it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent into the land of the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. So Saul was right. They're, abusing his body. They cut his head off, his hands. They tack his body up to a wall. I've done that with like a squirrel hide or a deer hide or something, tack it to a wall to dry it out or something like that. But, this is, they nailed him up, stuck him on a wall. Verse 11, and when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan and came to Jabesh and burned them there. And then they took their bones and burned them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So the people of Jabesh Gilead do a very good thing for Saul. Instead of having people make fun of his body or whatever. Now, it's just an empty shell at this point. But still, to show respect, they went and got the body, basically gave it a proper burial. Also, I want you to notice here what they did with Saul's body, who is a Christian. But Saul is not really able to have an open casket funeral. Okay? Because his head has been cut off of his body and his hands have been cut off of his body. So in other words, the dead body there does not look like Saul. So what do they do? In verse 12, the last part, and came to Jabesh and burnt them there, and they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. And the people of Jabesh Gilead are looked on highly by David and by God because he allows a lot of good things to be said about Jabesh Gilead because of what they did for Saul. This is a little bit of a controversial subject, but what happened to Saul with his funeral? He was cremated, right? His body was burned. There are a lot of people today that don't like cremation, and that is fine. I personally do not plan to be cremated. I have a burial plot. My wife, who died of cancer and did not want an open casket or anything like that, her body did not look like Tanya when she died. I will just spare you the details, but I've seen pictures of Holocaust people who looked better than she did when she passed. She lost a ton of weight. She lost all of her hair. Pretty rough. She didn't want people to see her like that. So she got cremated. And I've had a lot of people ask me, what do you think about cremation? A lot of Christians throughout history have been burned. And here it was done on purpose. It's a cremation. In other places, and not even in the Bible, maybe they're burned because they were they were persecuted. You got martyrs burned at the stake. That's a cremation, whatever. Our bodies are going to be raised at the last day. We are going to be raised and our bodies are going to be changed. I don't care if they're ashes or what. if I die and the Lord does not come back for 200 years, my body's pretty much going to be in the same state that Tanya's is in right now. It's pretty much going to be dust. Okay? So, now I understand the point against cremation because of people's association of it with pagan rituals. But here's what we must understand. It doesn't matter what we do with that body, the person is not there. They're in heaven or hell. Either way, they're there for eternity, and they're going to get a body that lasts for wherever they're at. Yeah. So, whether it's, there are Christians, like, oh, well, how do you explain, the dead shall raise? I know that over the course of the history of the world, there are Christians who have been eaten by animals and by fish. Where are their bodies? All over the place. Who knows? So I don't see it as a big of a deal as a lot of other people do. And I've had a lot of people, even in this church, ask me, what do you think about cremation? I don't see a problem with it because it was done for Christians in the Bible. And the Bible is very clear about how people are going to be raised in the last days. They're getting a new body. Thank goodness, because any Christian who's died previous to, say, the last 2 weeks, the body that's in the ground is not even going to be worth anything anyway. So, God is going to raise them up, but basically immediately they change to the new body. That's what we're going to have. There's you can get so deep into this and a lot of thinking about it. For example, like babies who are aborted. Okay, they're killed. I believe that those babies are living beings with living souls. And even young babies like, say, Ben's age. Let's say, he dies. He'll go to heaven. Why? Because he hasn't sinned yet. Why? Because he hasn't sinned yet? Because he doesn't know the law. And Paul said, I hadn't sinned until I knew the law. When you start doing things wrong, when you come to the age of 3 or 4 or whatever, you start sinning. That's when, as soon as you come to the realization, the Bible's clear on that. So when they're raised at the last day, do you think those aborted babies are going to get a body this big? That doesn't make any sense. I think they'll get a body that looks pretty much like everybody else's, but you'll just be able to tell who they are. Their body will look like it's about probably 30 years old, like Jesus' body, something like that. That's my own personal belief. I don't believe that little babies are, here's your new body, but you're this big. I don't think so. I think they're going to get a body that works well for eternity. No matter who they are, no matter when they died, as long as they are in heaven. So, it's something that not a lot of people really think about on that, but I think about it sometimes. I'm like, okay, so we're going to get a new body, right? So you want to make sure yours is in the ground? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Little babies who can't walk, who died tragically in car accidents or something like that, they're going to get a body that works. And they're not going to look like they're little tiny people. I don't think. It doesn't make sense. Nobody's going to be fat. Nobody's going to be skinny. Right? Our bodies are going to look great. I'm going to be able to tell who you are. You're going to be able to tell who I am. So that's the way it's going to be. And it'll last forever. But the one that we have here on this earth doesn't last very long after we leave it. After I leave this body, man, if it's decaying now, which it is because, my jaw already hurts a little bit from my tooth missing. If it's decaying now, wait till I leave it. In 3 or 4 days, it's done. So, anyways, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Father, I thank you for this day. Thank you for your many blessings to us.